Good evening, you're listening to The Truth Tank and I'm your host, The Tank. If this is your first time listening to The Truth Tank, a big welcome. If you're a repeat listener, welcome back. So, the lie of communism is finally done. I'll be recording it late December, early January for a March 2025 release. Next year's probably going to be all communism. I'll probably do a couple of movie review episodes thrown in as well to break up the dark, depressing, apocalyptic nightmare that is communism. It's going to be a monumental task to try to record all of that. I'm not sure how many parts it's going to be. It's probably going to be around 20, maybe more. It's going to be big. I'm aiming for an hour and a half long episodes, maybe an hour and 45. Possibly 2 hours, I'm not sure at this stage. It just depends on the recording and editing process. But before we get into that, we are going to have a look at a very controversial topic that has been making the rounds through the news in Australia, and that is Australia's digital ID systems. You may or may not have heard of it. Digital ID systems have been talked about probably for the last decade or so, ever since everything went online and became digital. Some genius or the powers that be decided that if everything else is going digital, why not make identification also digital? What could go wrong? It reads like the plot of a very bad sci-fi movie, but unfortunately governments in Australia and right around the world are discussing introducing digital ID systems. They're always talked about as being convenient and easy to use and will make people's lives so much easier. But the government is missing a lot of details. So what is digital ID? What does it mean? What does it do? Why is it being talked about and possibly implemented? These are the questions I'm going to try and answer tonight. I don't know a hell of a lot about digital ID, but it piqued my curiosity when I first heard about it. I thought to myself, I should probably cover that. That sounds interesting. Kind of fits with the narrative of the show. So without further ado, let's get into tonight's episode. This is episode 61 of The Truth Tank, Australia's digital ID. What does it mean for you?
Do you battle with things like anxiety, depression, and other mental illnesses? Hey, me too. Come on over, we can be besties. My name is Mikey on Mute. Join me on my new podcast where I talk about mental health, breaking toxic masculinity, and opening up the conversation. You can find me on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube under Mikey on Mute Podcast, where I'll tell you my story, as well as the stories of others, get perspective, and see where we can grow. Are you one of the cool kids that's on TikTok? Hey, me too. Search out Mikey on Mute to see show clips there as well. I really look forward to hearing your story and opening up the rest of this conversation. Talk to you soon.
So it's been a wild year so far. In recent weeks, Donald Trump has been re-elected as President of the United States. If you've listened to this show before, you know I do like Donald Trump. Whether he keeps his promises or not is another thing. At the time of recording, he hasn't taken office yet. Hopefully, he turns the ship around globally, and hopefully we're entering a new era of truth and prosperity. And we're going to put all the dark conspiracies and the plotting and the warmongering, forever wars, corrupt politicians and systems of government and business, hopefully all of that is going to be in the rear view, and we can go forward into a fair and cleaner future for everybody. So hopefully he can pull it off. He's got a good team behind him this time, but enough about that. I don't want to get into any more politics. Now let's have a look at digital ID and why it is so controversial. So what is Australia's digital ID system? What does it mean? Is it as bad as it sounds? Or is it the first steps in a Orwellian nightmare come true? Could it potentially be that Big Brother nightmare that sci-fi authors for the past 60 years have warned us about? And as I mentioned in the intro, I don't know a hell of a lot about digital ID. I'm a curious person, so I had to find out more. I'm going to be learning about this the same time you are. So let's go on a journey together and find out what digital ID systems are. So according to digitalidsystems.gov.au, the website for Australia's digital ID systems, if you hadn't guessed it already. According to their website, digital ID is voluntary. For now, it's voluntary until they make it mandatory, or enough people fall for the scam and sign up for digital ID, then they make it mandatory across the board because that's just easier, and they'll hide behind the we're trying to save the environment and the trees, so we're not going to use old-fashioned paper systems for ID. Let's put it all online. So it's voluntary, secure, and easy. I seriously doubt it's secure. Nothing the government or any other one of these systems ever puts into play is secure. The Australian government has a long history of rolling out digital record systems only to have them not work, crash repeatedly, or get hacked, and then they never seem to do much about it. It's on the news for a night and then it disappears. This happened a few times in the last 15 years since they've rolled out digital record systems. I, for one, are against digital ID systems for good reason. So let's learn more about digital ID according to the website. And this is the statement on the webpage: an easier, more secure and voluntary way to verify your ID. Gathering your ID documents and going to a shopfront or office to confirm your ID can be time-consuming and challenging. Really, how fucking challenging is it to walk to a post office or a records department with your personal ID and records, hand it over, and fill out a passport form or a driver's license or whatever it is that you're filling out? The language of these government statements is always pretty much the same. It's always this: gathering your ID documents and going to a shopfront or office to confirm your ID can be time-consuming and challenging. Everything's time-consuming. Do you think filling the digital forms out online is going to be any less time-consuming than waddling down to the post office and handing the forms in and getting someone else to write it out? No, probably not. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm one of these people that whenever I do anything online, it takes me like 3 goes to do it. And by the time I've finished it, I'm always like, why the fuck didn't I just fill that out manually? I would have done it in half the time. Whenever I sign up for an account for something, it always takes like at least half an hour. It's become such a chore. Whenever I do sign up for something, I have to set aside a good 2 or 3 hours to do it because it never ever works the first time. I remember when I set up Instagram, it took me like fucking 2.5 hours. I started at like 10 o'clock in the morning and I had finished by just after 12 noon. And I don't even know what I did wrong. It was just something didn't work and I kept having to change things here and there. I had to do at least 3 passwords, and that's another thing. I always end up having to do multiple passwords because they either don't work or something happens along the way. And I'm not the only person either. I know younger people and older people who have the same issues. So how is that any less time consuming than getting in the car or walking down to the shops and handing in at the post office or motor registration or whatever? Your digital ID lets you verify your ID online for work, education, and personal use. You can use your digital ID online anywhere, anytime. Each time you use your digital ID, you will need to agree before any of your information is shared with the service you want to use. And that's become a huge thing in the last couple of years. We're putting all our information online, and this is, you're literally putting your entire identity online. How can they verify that this is safe and secure? Because hackers have pretty much hacked every quote-unquote secure site or service on Earth at this point. Nothing is secure. Governments seem to be really incompetent and really naive when it comes to online security and just how advanced and sophisticated some hackers and hacker groups really are. Case in point, a couple of years ago with Optus, the big data breach, they were warned that their security was piss poor and they didn't do anything about it, and a hacker or hackers hacked the system pretty easily and got, I think it was like 5 million people's ID from the records they've kept through phone transactions. And this was past and future customers, so it's people 10 years ago who weren't even with Optus anymore. Also had their details stolen because, these companies just have to keep all your information and details stored on a very insecure hard drive somewhere that seems to be out in the open. They had to pay for new IDs. One of the big pieces of information and ID that was stolen was people's driver's licenses. So they had to pay for millions of new driver's licenses. So that means your photo, date of birth, address, anything hackers would need to get a large portion of your personal information to commit identity fraud against millions of people. They tried to ransom the information back to Optus and sell it back before it was released. Obviously, they didn't pay. The system got pretty out of hand and the government pretty much stepped in and demanded that Optus was going to pay for the IDs and compensation to victims. And that was a private company, which, they keep telling us our information is secure. You think they would have more than a basic level of security, but no, they didn't. And they'd been warned by online security services about the breaches in their security, and they did nothing. They were warned before it happened. And they're not the only company. There was another big health insurance company that was hacked a couple of months ago. Same thing, piss poor security. They were warned. They didn't do anything about it. Hackers stole personal information about millions of people, past and present customers, including medical records and what's medical conditions that certain people had. Very sensitive information that most people don't want getting out in the open. Your digital ID is an online method of confirming your ID that does not require physical documents. Digital ID does not replace your physical ID documents. It is a more secure and convenient alternative to traditional forms of ID. Bull fucking shit. If I have a safe at home with my birth certificate and all my personal details in it, that is far securer than anything you're ever going to put on the internet. That is a fucking bullshit statement. Anything you put online, no matter how fucking sophisticated or secure it claims to be, there is a risk of it being hacked. The same way if you put documents in a secure spot in your house in a safe, there's a risk the house could burn down and the documents could be damaged. Hence why you always keep a copy somewhere else. That is bullshit. They just want people to believe that this is secure. I remember I was in a Facebook group years and years ago, some business-related forum of some kind. Somebody asked, was there software that can bundle all your passwords together to make it easier to access passwords for various sites? There was about 20 comments. People were given the names of some software or some app that can do that, which once again is probably very insecure. I wouldn't trust it. You're putting all of your passwords onto one app or piece of software to make it easier. Are we that fucking lazy as human beings now? We can't just write shit down, keep it on a piece of paper or a notebook in a drawer. We need software to do pretty much everything for us because you're too lazy to do a physical method. It's going to take just the same amount of time. It's probably quicker writing it down on a piece of paper or in a notebook, and it's far more secure. And that's what I said to this person. I said, pen, pencil, and a notebook, it's unhackable. You keep it in a drawer, no one's going to know it's there. If it's online, if it's on an app or it's in the cloud or somewhere, it's vulnerable. And you want to put all your logins for all your businesses and all your personal accounts in one app, go for it. But I, for one, do not trust any of that shit. Digital ID can make it easier for you to do things like changing jobs, applying for a rental, or accessing many government services online. Just as easy to do that manually, in my opinion. Choice. You must be 15 years or over to create a digital ID using Australia's government ID provider, MyGov ID. And that is not an easy site to use. Some of the government services related to that are truly horrific and woeful, sounding allegedly. We'll get into some more examples of that later in the show. Also interesting that they've got an age restriction. That's a huge debate that's going on right now in Australia and overseas, is the age restrictions on social media services. In Australia, they want to make it 16. I actually think it probably should be higher. It should be 18. But they're trying to push this age verification onto the social media platforms, which I covered in the last show. So if you haven't listened to that, go ahead and listen to it now. It's worth a listen. This came up on Russell Brand's Stay Free podcast. He had an audio clip from one of the hearings about the age verification for social media, and someone brought up a really good point. He said to the person in charge that if there's new age verification brought in on social media, doesn't that mean everyone will have to therefore do an age verification test to use the apps? Which they didn't make very clear. There's a lot of grey zones and holes in the proposed legislation, which is something I mentioned on the previous episode about Bill C-63. There's a lot of good points, but there's a hell of a lot of grey zones that they haven't really thought of. And this guy put it to the person running the hearing, and they confirmed, well, yes, not everyone who uses social media is going to have to verify their age on these apps, which means you're going to have to give these companies more and more personal data, which probably means some proof of ID, 100 points of ID, probably a driver's license to confirm your identification. So now we're giving out social media companies who don't give a fuck about our personal data, and they haven't ever, so why would they now? We're now willfully handing them age verification. So they can store that on their very secure servers and sell it to the highest third party. And they can sell it to the highest fourth and fifth and sixth parties until it finds its way to some lowlife somewhere trying to scam an old lady out of their pension money. I think it's a fucking terrible idea. And if every social media user is required to provide verification of their age, I don't support age verification on social media. In my opinion, I think that's a breach of the government's duty of care to its citizens, and it's a violation of users' privacy. Maybe they need to rethink these proposed policies and come up with a fucking better idea. Like maybe, I don't know, getting the parents to stop buying the kids the phones in the fucking first place. Maybe the government needs to pressure the telecommunication companies about selling or signing kids up to phone plans, or maybe they need to ask parents more questions. Is this going to be used for a minor under the age of 16, 17, 18 years old? And if the answer is yes, they don't get the fucking phone. But that's not going to happen in a capitalist society because these companies want to get the sale and they have to get the sale to make money so they can make more money than they did in the last quarter. So that's probably not going to work either. ID proofing levels. When accessing or applying for services, you often need to prove who you are. Services have different ID requirements depending on the level of risk of providing services to the wrong person. Read more about ID proofing levels, and you're quite welcome to do that. I'd say the system has worked pretty well so far. How have businesses and companies provided background checks and ID checks in the past with manual systems? How did they ever survive before these messianic digital ID systems? They did it with pen and paper and making phone calls. There hasn't been an explosion of people being hired in the wrong jobs because of a failed background test. And what's to stop you lying on the digital ID system? Some people might not because of the fear of a G-man banging on your door, demanding that you provide the documents to back up your claims online. But at the same time, the government is overstretched as it is and doesn't have the personnel to go investigate millions of people who may or may not have lied on their digital ID forms. The world has worked perfectly, well, maybe not perfectly, but the wheels have continued to turn for the past 100 years using the good old-fashioned pen and paper and manual ID systems. And they're trying to act like this is going to be this new savior that's going to come in and make everything super easy. We've weared all this shit before, and in reality, this stuff never ever works. What are the benefits? For you, digital ID lets you access online services without looking for physical ID documents or going to a government or business office. You can manage your affairs from anywhere, whenever you want, provided you have internet access, the site hasn't crashed or been hacked. Are we really that lazy we can't just walk down to the shops? Are human beings that lazy they can't come out of their homes to engage with other people with the rest of the world? I think it's just an absolute pathetic excuse. Most people on a weekly basis have to leave the house a few times to either get groceries, get fuel. I mean, wait till they start doing fuel deliveries where you can buy your petrol online and a truck comes and fills your car up in the driveway. It's actually a good business idea. I might have to patent it. But most people, even though there is online grocery deliveries and food deliveries, most people still have to do some form of shopping at least once a week, which means they've got to go to a shopping centre, group of shops, a mall, whatever it is, and there's usually a post office or some type of government office, or at least there is where I live anyway. There's 2 post offices in under a kilometre from where I live that I can quite easily do this, hand in documents to get a passport or whatever, which would take me less time to do that than it would to log in and figure out how to do that all online. And if the government has anything to do with it, something is guaranteed to go wrong, in my humble podcasting opinion. Using a digital ID means fewer organisations will need to keep your personal information. This will lower the chances of your data being stolen. I call bullshit on that because I've heard that so many times by all of these institutions who want you to sign up for their digital services to keep records, medical records, whatever it happens to be, and there's always been data breaches. And whatever institution got breached never really apologises for it. Well, they do the corporate apology, but Nothing ever changes. The data is gone, and it's like, well, they've washed their hands of it and they've moved along, which is fucking bullshit. And the same thing is going to happen with this. I do not trust the government or any other company or organization to guarantee the safety of anything you put online. They can't. Especially now where you have hacking groups from all over the world. They're far more sophisticated than the government is. The government is still, I think, probably 5 to 10 years behind where it should be when it comes to cybersecurity and cyberspace. And as I mentioned on previous episodes, they never thought the digital world was going to affect the real world in the way it has. They never took it seriously enough to do anything about it when they could have. They thought it was a joke designed for kids to fuck around online with. They never thought the social media companies were going to become as big and as prevalent as they are, to the point where they're suppressing news and information and affecting the outcome of elections, allegedly. So I call bullshit on that. I guarantee as soon as this comes out, if it does, it'll get hacked within the first 2 years, and most people will have some form of their personal information stolen. And the government won't do anything about it. It will go out there. They'll just claim it's been lost. They'll compensate people with new IDs or whatever it happens to be, but your information's still out there. And I think within the next 10 years, pretty much everybody on Earth is going to have some form of personal information that has been hacked and out there circulating in the dark underbelly of cyberspace. A digital ID will reduce the need to remember usernames and passwords to sign into online services. I think that is also bullshit. It really annoys me when people are just too lazy to write passwords down in notebooks or designate a notebook for the sole purpose of keeping said passwords so it's easy to use and easy to find. That's what I do. And they're trying to say, well, if you're too lazy to keep a password, just do this and it's much easier. If you cannot keep a password, or making up different passwords is a chore, then you shouldn't really be using the internet. And I know plenty of people who will use very basic passwords, or they use the same one for pretty much everything, or don't log out and they just stay logged into an app. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that. I've done that sometimes, but you probably need to log out every once in a while, maybe change your passwords. And this is trying to claim that it's going to reduce the need to remember usernames and passwords to sign into online services. But really, how hard is that? They're trying to say that, oh, you're so fucking lazy, you don't have to do this. You don't literally have to go to a drawer, get a book out, open a page, and type in a few characters on a keyboard and press enter. Are we seriously, as a species, too lazy to even fucking do that? If we can't do that, there's not much hope for us in the future. Enable more services to be offered online with a secure way to check your ID wherever you are at any time. Not replace any of your ID documents. It will give you a simpler and safer way to prove your ID online. Why do I have to prove my ID online? They want us to go online to therefore prove it. It's already been proven. If you get a bill, you get a driver's license, your ID's pretty much been proven. If you have a passport, it's even more proven. And this is similar with the legislation for Bill C-63. People are pretty much treated as guilty, and then they have to prove their innocence. I'm getting the feeling anyway, the way I'm interpreting this, that this is kind of in a similar vein. It will give you a simpler and safer way to prove your ID online. To who and why? Why do I have to prove it? It's already been proven. This is just another way for the governments to have, in my opinion, to have even more leverage over, well, your ID for one, but also control. Like if the government's got all this information on you, it becomes harder to hide. Not like the average citizen is hiding from anything, but in my opinion anyway, it's just another way for the government to control us even further on a micro and a macro level. Like, do they really need all this ID? And if so, why? What's the purpose of digital, quote-unquote, digital ID? Because it's not doing anything against stopping terrorism or child trafficking or any of the bad shit. It's literally victimizing the tax-paying citizens of countries for no apparent reason. If it's to stop crime, why not say that? And that's not going to stop crime, because nothing will. It's just unfortunately part of the human story and the human condition. So why does the government need you to have all this ID online? And they say it's voluntary now, but you wait in 10 years, it fucking won't be. And then that Orwellian nightmare will come to life. And I think sensible citizens should be skeptical of government, especially when they want to bring out systems like this, when it seems really great on the surface if you don't start to really read into it. But then when you start to think about it, there's a lot of holes and gaps in this proposed plan, and it sounds too good to be true, and if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. For business. Businesses only want to keep information from your ID documents when they have to. I also call bullshit on that because we've seen time and time again most businesses are unnecessarily keeping records. Point in case, the Optus data breach. Why did they have information about customers that went back 10 to 12 years? Why did they need to keep the information of past customers? There was no good reason. There was no good explanation given for it either. They just had 10 years of past customers' personal details just lying around in a back closet somewhere. Why? You'd have to ask them. I don't know of any businesses that willingly give up our personal information. They keep it. Who knows what they do with it? A lot of them sell it to third parties. I mean, I'm pretty much convinced that that's what they do, and that's the purpose of it. It's just an extra revenue source for them. Not all of them, but a majority of them do. The bigger the company, the less chance you have it finding out or fighting back against them because they just got more money than you. You can't sue a giant telecommunications company because they're just going to laugh it off, pay you compensation, and if that's how it goes, and then ignore it and sell the next person's information. It's just all extra revenue because that is the one bad thing about capitalism is the greed is endless. And these companies have to continually look for new revenue sources and make more and more money and they never seem to be content with what they have. A lot of companies now, whenever you go anywhere, they ask for postcodes or do you want a receipt sent to you via SMS or email? It's just a very sneaky way to get your contact details so they can put you on the list to send you a bunch of advertising material or vouchers or whatever. But it's also to get your information so they can target advertisement. And what do they say in the business world now? They create a profile of what you may or may not like. They're basically feeding the algorithm with your information. Well, they want the information so they can target this shit to you. So they can come up with a customized shopping experience is usually the excuse they use. And once again, I think they do sell that information on. It wouldn't surprise me if they did. And who's to say these businesses are going to get rid of your information? The government doesn't have a good track record of controlling massive corporations. It's the other way around. The corporations seem to control or have a pretty big say in the government. So who's to say these companies actually get rid of your personal data? There's no body in place to make sure they do it. No one from a government agency is going around to the businesses knocking on the door and saying, hey, are you getting rid of your personal information from customers? No, until that happens and there's some special group that does that, I don't believe it. They only need to make sure that they're dealing with someone who is genuine, not a fundraiser, not a fraudster. Okay, yeah, that's a good excuse. There's other ways to tell that. Digital ID reduces the amount of documents customers need to share. This reduces the amount of personal data a business needs to hold. Use of a digital ID lowers the impact of data breaches for the business and their customers. How? I don't believe a word of that. Data breaches have impacted many Australians in recent years and are one of the biggest privacy risks Australians face today. The only reason that is one of the biggest risks is because these businesses and these companies make us hand over more personal information than is actually required. Why do you need so much information to get a fucking phone? Why is a driver's license or a bill or whatever not enough? They say, well, we need a driver's license and a passport. Oh, we need a passport or this information or a driver's license and a bill that isn't gas or electrical. Like, do you really need that much info? If I reach into my wallet and pull my driver's license out and go, here, there's my ID, that's a picture of me, that's my details. The person looks at me, you see, face matches the face there. Isn't that enough? Why do you need more? And that was a huge thing, once again, with the Optus breach, was why are companies like Optus requiring customers to bring in passports or driver's licenses. And yes, you can argue the passport if you're not a nationalised citizen and you don't have a driver's license or any other ID, but you need a phone. Yes, that's a legitimate form of ID. But if you're an Australian citizen or a US citizen or a British citizen and you got to get a phone, why isn't the government-issued driver's license from the state you live in good enough? And you can't tell me that there isn't enough information about everybody out there already, that these companies don't already know who you are. They probably know who you are before you even get into the shop. And I dare say they probably know what phone a certain customer is going to get just by looking at them. And if you've been a customer for like 10 years, they should get rid of that information after a certain amount of time. They already know who you are. They know that you're a reputable customer and you're not a fraudster, as they claim. So why isn't that enough? It's going to lower the impact. I don't see how putting more information out there online is going to lower the risk of data breaches. Logically, I'd say that's probably going to increase the amount of data breaches, or at least the risk of data breaches. That doesn't make any fucking sense. Data breaches have impacted many Australians in recent years and are one of the biggest privacy risks Australians face today. A reduction in the impact of future data breaches will protect people and businesses from scams and identity crime. So far, they haven't done a very fucking good job, and identity theft and scams have been around for a pretty long time now. I don't see much being done on that front. Then again, I don't really look into it. But if the government and these institutions were making real progress in identity scams and theft, wouldn't we see a reduction in said identity scams and not a massive increase like we have seen in the last 5 to 10 years? Because 10 to 15 years ago, it was very rare to come across an ID scam, and now it seems to be a weekly occurrence where you get scams. Oh, you got this parcel from Australia Post or from Amazon or whatever. Unfortunately, we couldn't deliver it. Head on over to this website and put your address in. Oh, really? I didn't realize I had ordered anything. The postage scams are a really prevalent scam that has gone around in the last couple of years. You get a text from claiming to be from Australia Post or DHL or Toll or any of the other courier companies, claiming they couldn't deliver a parcel due to some unknown reason, and they provide a link. Go over there and give you details, and then we'll seek to redeliver it, which is bullshit because Australia Post has gotten on top of that. They don't send links for one, which most people who are under the age of 40 probably know that by now. If there's no links in a message or an email, it's probably from a legit source. If the bank's going to send, the bank scams are another one where they send you something with a link. The bank never sends, like the post office never sends a link in a text message and asks you to click a link and go off site. They've really got on top of that, and the banks are actually pretty good at getting on top of ID scams, at least in Australia anyway. For government, digital ID is a tool for improving online government services. I'd say it probably couldn't get any worse. Online government services make it easier to access the services you need from government. This is especially for people in remote areas and Australians with disability. A secure and trusted ID solution will enable more responsive and tailored services. Maybe that's legit. There's a lot of people who live in communities that are pretty heavily isolated, but I'd say it's probably better to fix up the internet in those places, because you would need the internet to access the online ID services. If you don't have decent internet, that'd still be a problem, I'd imagine. These benefits include more efficient government service delivery, e.g. shortening the time to get a tax file number from 28 days to 10 minutes. Okay. Faster help from government and businesses for people who lose access to their ID documents. This may be due to scams and or other situations such as natural disasters or family violence. That's the basic outline on digital ID systems from digitalidsystems.gov.au. I think I'll keep my privacy, thanks. I think it's more secure if you never give up this information in the first place. As we've just seen, there's a hell of a lot of flaws and grey zones in that proposed system. I don't think they've really thought through everything. Why are we giving more information to keep ourselves safe from the scams that originated from us putting the information out there in the first place. I mean, I don't see how preventing something or limiting the risk of ID scams is decreased by me giving more of my personal information and putting it out there online, especially to very new, unproven and untested government services. That doesn't make a hell of a lot of sense to me. How can you give more of something and then reduce the risk of it? It doesn't make any fucking sense. It's nearly like saying, oh, I went surfing the other day and we saw a shark and it got pretty close. It come up and nudged the board, which actually did happen somewhere in Australia a couple of days ago. A guy was out surfing and the shark came up underneath his surfboard and nudged it. There's about 20 surfers in the water at the time, and they had to slowly paddle back to the beach, which was a fair way off. It would have been fucking terrifying. It's like saying we narrowly avoided getting attacked or bitten by a shark. We've seen a shark underneath the surfboards. He's not interested. He's gone away. And then we've headed to the beach. We've got out of harm's way. Except it's personal information. You've just narrowly avoided losing your personal information to hackers, or having it stolen in a massive data breach through a company that shouldn't have had the information in the first place. And then going back the following day with pieces of raw meat strapped to yourself, covered in blood, get back on that surfboard and then head out back into the ocean and trying to attract the shark. I don't see how putting more of our personal information out there makes it safer. Maybe I've just read this completely the wrong way, but that's what it looks like to me anyway. And like a lot of government things, there's a lot of obvious bullshit and lies in that description. How the website makes it look and sounds, it makes it sound like this happy and safe place where nothing can possibly go wrong. It's all safe and secure and voluntary. It never says why the need for the information, despite the government already having pretty much most people's information anyway. They've already got all of our information on a database somewhere. If you pay bills, you vote, you have a driver's license, our information's already out there. I don't know how much more personal information they possibly need. I mean, next they're going to be asking for people's shoe size, hair colour, eye colour. And the government doesn't exactly have a very good success rate with any new online system whatsoever. They've had some pretty massive failures in the past couple of years. Robo Debt being one of them, which was through Centrelink. Centrelink is part of the government services. It's like welfare. You access that via the MyGov website, which has Medicare and Centrelink, as well as the taxation services and other government services connected to it. You can customize it. If you're not on one service, you don't have to include it, but you can include the government services that you need, like disability support or whatever. A couple of years ago, back in 2017, the Australian government, under the Liberal government, under, what was his name, Malcolm Turnbull, the minister in charge of this was Alan Tudge, allegedly one of the lowest forms of life on planet Earth. He implemented a system called Robo Debt, which was later revealed to be a giant scam that the government knew about and implemented on millions of very vulnerable Australians. I myself was involved in this. Now, welfare isn't just for like dole bludgers and people trying to cheat the system. This was for students who had to get Centrelink. When I was a student, I had to get it. I could only work so many hours. I only was really working on weekends and Thursday nights. And obviously the rest of the time I was at uni. So you get basically a government allowance to study, which is like 120, 140 bucks a week. It's not much. Actually, no, it wasn't a week. I think it was 140 a fortnight. It was pretty low. And you have to jump through a lot of hoops. You can't work a certain amount of hours. And if you went over the hours, you got your payments deducted, which is fair enough. And during school holidays, I could obviously work more because uni wasn't in. So I would work pretty much those 2 weeks to get as much money as possible, take the deduction, and then move on. Fast forward a few years, and then I was trying to sign up for something else. I was going back to uni, so I was trying to fill out this form on a government system via the new online portal that had been in operation for a couple of years. Centrelink's online services were so unusable. I used to drive down to my nearest office and hand in pay slips manually. So they had all this stuff on record. They had the physical copies of my pay slips. They had this put into their computer systems, but their computer systems are so fucked and basically unusable. You had to go down there and manually do it. And I'd like to also get verification that I had actually done it, because you put things online and then you get a letter 2 weeks later saying you haven't filed your pay slips. And then you'd have to be like, what the fuck? Like, yes, I have. And you'd try to use it, then you'd log in, you'd start filling a form out, you'd hit the next to go to the next page, and then it'd log you out of the site, and then you'd do that again. When I was going back to uni and I was filling out the payment support documents, I was logged out probably 10 times. It took about 3 hours to try to complete, and then just when I finally had got to the last page, which I'd only seen, I think, once before, I hit complete, and then this took me to another screen, and it said, you owe $4,800 in overpayments. I'm like, what the fuck? Like, I've never even heard of this before. I put in all my pay slips, I did everything the right way, and it hit me with this outstanding figure in red. And then I started looking into it, and then this happened to millions of other Australians, uni students, disability and support payments, as well as the elderly. A lot of people were just paying it and not querying it, especially a lot of the older people. I fucking queried it. I had to prove my innocence because I was already guilty by the system. And that's why I'm so skeptical of anything the government does, because I have been there, done that, and not doing it again. Out of this $4,800 I allegedly owed, because I keep all my receipts, I kept all my pay slips, and I found them all. I remember going down to an office with literally an entire metal tin full of pay slips, and I said, I want you to copy all of these, and I want a receipt with your name, the time, your employment number, and all that other shit. I thought it was over, and no, of course it wasn't. I ended up getting somebody on the phone, because if you ring up asking for payments or you didn't get a payment, you're on hold for 12 days. But if you owe them money, you get straight through. In the call centers, they were taking people away from other service lines and putting them just specifically on the robot debt payments, because people were ringing up and just handing the government money. I ended up getting that reduced. So they said, it actually hasn't been calculated properly. So the real payment is actually $200 and something. And I didn't have any money at the time, so I had to opt for a payment plan. I was paying them the minimum payment of like $15 a fortnight. To this day, I pay $250, which doesn't seem like a lot, which is not, but it's the principle behind it. I paid $250 to the government for an overcharge I never incurred. And as it found out the system was corrupt, the guy that invented it and the guy that came up with the program who put it into place said it's really flawed and buggy, and it shouldn't never be put into use because it has too many flaws. And the government said, no, it's fine. They unleashed on the public knowing that it was flawed. And as it came to light a few years later, there was a government inquiry, there was a royal commission. The Liberal government more or less put this out there to try and scam as much money out of people as possible from the lowest ends of the financial scale, including students like myself, the elderly, the vulnerable. People kill themselves over it. It's no joke. I mean, the government got sued because of it. There was supposed to be compensation, which I was in that bracket, but they said I was a level 2 or whatever it was. No way, this is the real kick in the fucking nuts. I was in grade 2 or level 2 of Robo Debt, so basically I queried it, and then I got the payment reduced, so therefore I wasn't up for the compensation because it was a reduced amount. Sorry, you owe me $250. I paid $250. That's something I never fucking did. And I was treated like a villain, and I had to prove my fucking innocence. That was the most stressful period I've ever gone through. It was not fun. I wouldn't recommend it. So because I got a reduced amount, I was taken out of the class action lawsuit against them, so I don't get any compensation where others did. Centrelink did this years and years, about 20 years ago. They had another workers' compensation class action lawsuit where workers had got, I think, cancer or asbestosis from working in dangerous conditions, and they tried to delay this from having to pay the victims. I don't know a lot about it. Anyway, a lot of the victims who were in the class action lawsuit actually died of cancer because of the asbestosis. And after so many of them died, then they paid a reduced settlement amount to the survivors. And I got a feeling that that's the same thing here, because one of the young men that took his life, he was a student. His debt was apparently $18,000, and he's like, I haven't even got that much money, so how can I owe it? And when I added up, and I had an accountant do this too. I didn't use my dyslexic math skills to do it. I had this checked multiple times by accountants and people who were really good at fucking maths. I had only ever ended up earning through my student payments about $1,500 or $1,800. So how the fuck can I therefore owe double that amount? How can I possibly owe $4,800? The maths doesn't add up, and that was the whole system, was leveraging what people were getting in terms of their welfare payments, student payments, whatever it was. Then it was predicting what they might earn in the future. So how the fuck can you have a system like that in place that predicts what might happen? This is like I said on the Bill C-63 episode, this is the Minority Report paradox. It's leveraging predictions based off of what might happen in the future. In other words, you're guilty of murder before you've actually killed somebody, in the terms of Minority Report. So people who were getting $18,000 bills probably got like $4,000 in payments, and then the system was saying, well, this person's got $4,000. Well, if we times that by whatever, it's predicted that they're probably going to get another $8,000 in the future, then combining those totals, or however the fuck it worked. Tudge, the soulless piece of shit husk of a human fucking being that he is, never apologized. He stuck to his guns. He said, we are going to collect every debt owed. We are going to hunt down these people. He might not have said that, but he implied that they were going to go after every fucking debt owed on a system that was corrupted, flawed, never worked, to collect debts that were wrong and illegal. It was deemed illegal. If you don't believe me, you can look all this up. It's been in the news for a long time. Both sides of government were outraged, and there was little compensation to any of the victims. I haven't got any money from it. If you wait long enough, you might get a compensation in like 10 years' time. Some people did get compensated, but I heard of one woman who apparently had like $24,000 owing. Actually, might not have been $24,000. I think it was more like $16,000. She paid thousands of that back because she had a job by that time, so she didn't think much of it. So she was just going to pay it off. She paid the government thousands for overpayments she never actually received, and she only got a fraction of that back in compensation. So even the compensation was bullshit. Enough about that. That's making me fucking angry. There's also a lot of problems when Medicare went online. There's, I think, data breaches or something didn't work or records got out. There's a big thing about that. Then there was this year, the Labor government brought in a referendum to vote for an Indigenous voice in Parliament. They spent $500 million on it, and it failed miserably. So they can spend $500 million for advertisement for a referendum that went nowhere, but they can't compensate their own tax-paying citizens who they willingly ripped off. If you're in the US, you're probably well aware of government accounting and spending. Biden's government doesn't have enough money for hurricane relief, but can find $53 billion lying around in the back cupboard of the White House for the Ukraine war. I mean, how much money has gone to the Ukraine war that they've just magically found lying around the place? But they can't do anything about the fentanyl crisis. Then a couple of years ago with the Black Saturday bushfires, the government couldn't really do much about upgrading the country fire services, giving them the equipment and stuff needed to fight these massive fires. No one could predict how bad those fires were going to be. But they had a lot of money through volunteers, which a lot of it's been held by charities and not released for future crises. They couldn't do anything about upgrading the fire until the nation burnt to the ground. On the news this morning, the Victorian government, in all their wisdom, has started spending disaster relief fund money for infrastructure projects. They got rid of the Commonwealth Games a couple of years ago under the brilliant leadership of Daniel Andrews. He cancelled the Commonwealth Games because it's going to cost billions of dollars to put on. And I think the real reason they did that, allegedly, this is just my opinion, I think the Victorian government knew they were fucked. I think they spent too much money on the lockdowns during COVID. They bankrupted the state. They cancelled the games because obviously they couldn't afford it. And now all this money from disaster relief is being used for infrastructure projects. This is coming from the same government that can't afford to pay their police force a better wage to protect its citizens. They won't pay them anymore, but they've got all this money for infrastructure projects that's been siphoned out of disaster relief. It's also ironic that they had bushfires there on the weekend. So, maybe the good Lord is telling you something there. And when I hear a lot of people talking about COVID and Australia's response to it, saying there was draconian laws and people were being locked down in their houses and they couldn't go outside, that was pretty much just Victoria. Where I am, none of that shit happened. I went to the shops fucking every day and I was never stopped by the police or anything like that. Daniel Andrews locked down Victoria like a communist dictatorship. He was the one that blocked people in apartment buildings and had the longest lockdown in the world. That all happened under his watch. The entire country wasn't like that. It was like the US. Every state was different because the federal government couldn't really seem to mandate a nationwide response. It was the premiers of the states ultimately had final say of how the state would deal with the COVID response. Other greatest hits from the Australian government include letting China buy up land around the country, including the Port of Darwin. That was a great idea. Upgrading the NBN, that's still going on. That was implemented under Tony Abbott that was like fucking 12 years ago. Internet still sucks. It's not high speed. It's garbage. And they're still replacing the cables. I saw the truck around my area a couple of weeks ago. And then there's no high-speed rail network, despite most of the governments arguing back and forth about a new high-speed rail network for the past 40 years. But enough about that. One of the biggest issues with this system, besides the obvious, is the infrastructure or lack thereof. And as I just mentioned about the NBN, Australia's NBN rollout was a fucking disaster. Tony Abbott, the Prime Minister at the time, wanted high-speed cables, and that was 12 years ago at least, well over a decade. He was overruled by some of the cheaper fucks in the government in favour of cheaper, inferior Chinese-made cables. They weren't as good, they couldn't handle the volume of information as quick. So the NBN, the National Broadband, whatever it stood for, it was rolled out. They started replacing the cables with these cheaper cables. Fast forward a few years and most of those cables were being replaced with the ones that Mr. Abbott wanted in the first place. So, government doesn't have a great track record of doing things logically, cheaply, or sensibly. It usually comes down to money or some other nonsensical reason. I don't think the digital ID system is going to be much different. And just going back to the internet speeds, Australia has one of the worst internet speeds in the world. And this is from a first world nation. Maybe the government needs to fix that before they go launching another digital network that is designed to get heavy traffic and use on a daily basis. Because the systems and infrastructure we have in place can't keep up with fucking Netflix streaming, let alone uploading millions of documents and pieces of identification to a new ID system. And I stream sport quite a lot. There's an app here called KO, and I don't know if it's just because the Chromecast I use is old or if it's because of the internet speeds, but it's very laggy and it's constantly dropping out and I'm always having to stop and cancel and recast it. I mean, Australia's internet, it probably isn't as bad as I'm making it out, but we're pretty shit in the global scheme of things. I think we're number 60 or something like that out of 80 developed nations. It's pretty piss poor. So the infrastructure needs to get fixed before a safe and secure ID platform is released. And that's, I think, probably half the problem with a lot of these businesses and companies that do everything online, is that there's just not enough bandwidth and internet speed to keep up with what everyone's doing. I don't know, maybe having faster NBN makes things safer or something, I don't know. And just to help better prove my point, there's an article on sbs.com.au titled 6 Million Times Faster, a New Internet Speed Record and How Australia Compares. It's by Rishika Talwar, published 20th of July 2024. There's a new global internet speed record and it's about 6 million times faster than Australia's average. A team in Japan's National Institute of Information and Communications Technology hit 402 terabytes per second, breaking the previous record of 321. Australia's average internet speed pales in comparison at about 66 megabytes per second. Ouch. According to this article, how does Australia compare with the top 10 countries on mobile internet speeds in Mbps? Number 1, surprisingly enough, is Qatar, followed by United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, Norway, Denmark, South Korea, China, Saudi Arabia, Netherlands, and Bahrain. Very interesting. I was not expecting that. Australia comes in at number 22. How does Australia compare with the top 10 countries on broadband internet speeds in Mbps? 1 is Singapore, followed by United Arab Emirates, Hong Kong, Chile, United States, Iceland, France, Thailand, Denmark, and China. Australia is number 82. That's fucking pathetic. Some other big issues why I think this isn't the best idea in the world. As I touched upon earlier, there has been a lot of hacks of Australian businesses. Optus is probably the most high-profile corporate data breach. In the past couple of months, there's been an increase in private health insurance companies being hacked and the information being stolen, as well as everyone's favourite banks, and a lot more. And some of these aren't mega companies or corporations either. Some of them, these are a lot smaller and a lot more localised too, which is a bit scary because a lot of those companies don't have the money or the infrastructure to do much about it, unlike Optus or the private health insurance companies that make millions and millions of dollars a year and can afford to upgrade their infrastructure and security, but for whatever reason just choose not to. And unfortunately, these companies we have trusted with our information and data, and they promised to keep it safe and secure, but ultimately lied. In some cases, namely Optus, their online security was so poor that a basic and amateur hacker managed to steal millions of customers' data pretty easily. Optus was warned that this was a possibility and that their security was pretty shit. And they were warned they should upgrade it, but for whatever reason, their security branch brushed it off and claimed that it was fine until it wasn't, and the biggest data hack in Australian history happened in 2022. To get a bit more background on the Optus hack, I found this article on abc.net.au. Optus cyber attack could have been prevented 4 years prior, says Telecom's watchdog. It's by Hannah Murphy, published Thursday, 20th of June. Optus could have prevented a data hack that leaked the details of about 9.5 million Australians 4 years prior, the Australian Telecommunications Watchdog alleges. The Australian Communications and Media Authority made the claim in a filing to the federal court, where it has logged an action against Optus for failing to protect its customers' personal information during a data breach in 2022. In its filing, ACMA outlined how it alleged the cyber attack took place. Quote, Optus's failure was due to a coding error which it did not detect during and for 4 years prior to the September 17th, 20th, 2022 data hack, the authority claimed. As a result, the personally identifiable information of more than 9.5 million former and current customers of Singtel Optus Pty Limited and its subsidiaries were accessed by a cyber attacker. ACMA said it would seek civil penalties against Optus for its alleged failure. A vulnerable domain left dormant. The federal court filing detailed a number of, quote, vulnerabilities ACMA believed the Optus system to have. It said 2 of the company's domains had the same coding error for one of its access controls, which left it open to cyber attack. But ACMA said at one point Optus noticed the error and fixed it, but only one of its domains. The other was left vulnerable, and that kind of seems pretty stupid. Why bother fix one and not the other? It just seems very lazy, because surely they had the resources to do that, and you have to think the cost of a breach is probably far greater than the cost of overtime to have your IT team stay up for a couple of nights and get it done. And ultimately that's what ended up happening. And unfortunately for Optus, they've taught a valuable lesson to thousands of other companies who have neglected their online security. Optus has the opportunity to identify the coding error at several stages in the proceeding for years, the filing said. The domain was permitted to sit dormant and vulnerable to attack for 2 years and was not decommissioned despite the lack of any need for it. That's pretty unforgivable that they did let it sit for 2 years. If you're one of the people that had personal information stolen, you'd be really fucking pissed off by that quote. Despite the then Optus chief executive Kelly Bayer Rosemarine referring to the attack as, quote, sophisticated at the time, ACMA said they disputed the claim. Quote, the cyber attack was not highly sophisticated or one that required advanced skills or proprietary or internal knowledge of Optus's processes or systems, the filing said. It was carried out through a simple process of trial and error. This makes Optus's neglect for their security look even fucking worse. And I'm pretty convinced an issue like this is going to happen with the digital ID system. Nothing is secure. The government doesn't take this shit seriously. They cut corners and costs everywhere, including the internet infrastructure. Yet they want people to trust that they have their information secure and it's safe and easy to use. Yes, it might be easy to use, but nothing is safe and secure online. I just don't think they've thought through all the contingencies, especially when you have a company like Optus that can afford to do some pretty basic online maintenance to prevent an issue, but yet they just chose to ignore it for 2 years and the biggest data hack in the country's history happened and then they had to pay for it. The government doesn't have the best record when it comes to paying compensation either. The authority also detailed the harm that had since come from the attack and said that the number of people targeted in the attack was just over a third of Australia's population. Yeah, wow, it does really put things into perspective. Quote, one of the active subscribers of an Optus service, 3.154.171 customers, had their physical addresses accessed and 2.47.036 had their information accessed, the filing said. Quote, the cyber attack led to the personally identifiable information of approximately 10,1200 Signet Signtel Optus customers being published on the dark web. What does Optus say? Probably not a lot. Optus interim chief executive Michael Venter said the telco still deeply regrets the cyber attack. I bet it fucking does, considering it had the means to do something about the attack 2 years before it happened, but chose not to. Corporate laziness. And customers had a right to believe their data would be kept safe. Well, that's fucking beside the point. It's already out there. You said you're going to keep it safe the first time. Now they're saying they had the right to believe their data would be kept safe. Digital ID, this is the same thing. They're already telling us that it's safe and secure, despite time and time and time and time again, data breaches happening on the most secure websites by private companies and corporations and governments alike. So there's no guarantee they can keep anything safe. And I just don't think putting all your information on the internet is a good idea anyway. However, he said the attack was motivated and determined. Quote, the cyber attack resulted from the cyber attacker being able to exploit a previously unknown vulnerability in our defenses that arose from a historical coding error, he said. This vulnerability was exploited by a motivated and determined criminal as they probed our defenses. It kind of sounds like a convenient cover-up. And then exploited and evaded these defenses by taking steps to bypass various authentication and detection controls that were in place to protect our customers' data. The criminal did this by mimicking usual customer activity and rotating through tens of thousands of different IP addresses to evade detection. Well, if they knew how this guy did it, why didn't they do more to try and stop it? Yes, that might be hindsight 2020. Everything's easier to see in retrospect. Maybe they're telling the truth and they didn't know what was happening at the time and they only figured it out afterwards, but they seem to know a lot about how this guy or group or whoever it was got hold of this information in the first place. Yet it seems like they had more than enough chances to try and stop it. He said Optus had since worked to address the vulnerability and continue to invest in cyber defenses. Yeah, I fucking hope so. Optus recognises that we still have much to do to fully regain our customers' trust and will continue to work tirelessly towards this goal, Mr. Venter said. Optus will continue to cooperate with the ACMA on this matter, although it intends to defend the actions and, where necessary, correct the record. It will ultimately be a matter for the federal court to determine whether there has been any breach or the appropriateness of any sanctions against Optus. The next hearing in the federal court is set to take place in September. And the good people of Australia are meant to believe the government has their back and has done enough to stop this type of thing happening again. I don't care what government it is or what corporation it is, no one can truly guarantee online safety, at least not yet, not with the infrastructure we currently have or the programs or protocols in place. Governments need to get a lot more advanced if they want to stop data breaches and hacks from happening in the future. I just don't think they have the personnel, know-how, or drive to do it at the moment, despite the fact that in the last 10 years, data breaches and hacks and identity theft have become a daily occurrence, especially when the network that it runs on hasn't been updated enough to handle a system like this. I think in the post-COVID period that a lot of people distrust the government even more now. The other concerning thing is these companies are not held accountable enough for data breaches, and the government certainly won't either. The government is so fucking arrogant, it won't and never will admit they fucked up. Case in point, as I mentioned earlier, Robo Debt. They never apologised, they never admitted it was flawed, they try to lie and cover it up. So how can we trust them now when they want us to put all of our information into a digital ID system? So all of our information now is out there at their fingertips, and we're expected to trust them that they're going to do the right thing with it. I don't know about you, but I call bullshit. The entire system from the ground up, and I literally mean from the cables underneath the ground to every part of a system like this, needs to be completely overhauled first before the government can even think about unleashing a new system like this onto the public. The other question we need to ask, did anyone actually ask for this in the first place? Why is it being implemented? Why is it being brought in all of a sudden? Is this just the byproduct of a ever-increasing digital world? Or is it for control and silencing of personal freedoms? I look at this like the cashless society bullshit. Who asked for a cashless society? The banks did. Who's trying to enforce and who reiterates every chance they get that society is going cashless and everyone needs to get on the cashless bandwagon? The banks do. Who closed thousands of branches in the past decade? Who tore out all the ATM machines so there's now only a finite amount of them around? Who's been trying to get customers to sign up to do all their banking online? The banks have. Who fucked their own employees out of jobs? The CEOs of banks. And this is the same fucking thing. Who wants this system? Do you want it? I certainly don't. So if you don't want this system and I don't want this system, who does want this system? Who's pushing this new system so hard? Who's claiming it's safe and effective before it's even been tested or trialed? I think the answer to that question is pretty fucking obvious. It's the government. So the question to ask ourselves now would be why? Why do they want it? Why are they pushing it so hard? Why now, a few years after a lockdown and pandemic, where there is a total lack of trust or faith in the government? The credibility of governments all over the world has taken a massive hit since COVID. Could this be a way of clawing back more control over citizens? Or do they simply want to do the right thing? If you're not as conspiratorially minded as myself, I would say governments usually have ulterior motives for doing things. They don't always give up information willingly. They make things sound more appealing and attractive than they actually are. And they don't always tell you the full story or the details. That's if in fact they have all the details figured out and there isn't some giant gaping holes in their proposed plans. One could also argue that a new digital ID system makes people easier to control for the next pandemic or disaster or whatever other excuse the government uses to justify more social controls. It would also make citizens much easier to track in a central ID system. The government could make you a digital slave by restricting your money. As I just mentioned, the banks have been pushing online banking for well over a decade now. So if everything is online, including your ID, the money you access to live, records, bills, vehicle registration, medical records, and all this other sensitive, vulnerable information, it makes a population much more easier to manipulate, control, monitor. You could look at that from many different angles. There's always some hidden agenda. When you go to buy something at a shop and they say, do you want a receipt emailed or SMS to you? They want to get your information. You are freely handing it over. They now have your information. They can now send you information about sales or whatever, upcoming promotions, send you a offer for your birthday to encourage you to buy, or sell your information to third parties. And a side note, if businesses don't accept cash and makes you use card payments to buy something, then charges you a surcharge to spend your own money at that business, walk away. And that's the thing about surcharges. It's only recently that businesses have been required to let the public know that they're using surcharges, or you will be charged a surcharge if you use a card. So how much free money did the banks make and financial institutions before they advised the surcharges? Everyone was just deaf, dumb and blind to what was really going on. So sometimes government intervention is a good thing. Companies and corporations would rape the whole world if they could and surcharge you for breathing or drinking water. These are the same people that think you should buy everything, including what's considered a human right, such as clean water. However, there's no guarantee the government won't do a similar thing with digital ID. They could start tracking your habits. They might track your spending, where you're spending it, why you're spending it. If you receive welfare payments and you're not buying food or groceries or fuel, and you're going to the bottle shop every day, spending it on cheap piss, does your money get restricted? Because that's been talked about years ago. They were talking about bringing cards in that you could only spend at supermarkets. The big theory a few years ago is that most dole bludgers or welfare recipients were just spending their welfare payments on drugs and alcohol in order to get high, and not spending it on food or medicine, which they claim was the reason they needed the welfare in the first place. But then again, is that a bad thing? Is it wrong to, if you're on a welfare payment because you can't work, because your knees are fucked and you can't walk, and you can only stand up for so many hours a day, but yet you go and spend $50 or $100 a day on the pokies, or you wander into a bottle shop afterwards and spend another $50 on cheap beer, should you be restricted from doing so if that's under a government welfare payment? Now, fair enough, if that's your own money and you're working and you're not getting any type of welfare, different story. Is the government entitled to do that? And then when does it stop? If you claim you have a medical condition and you're not going to the chemist and buying whatever, because they'll probably be able to track this because everything's digital and there's a record of everything now, where would it end? Do they start busting people for buying cheaper concession tickets to see football games when the information you've given to the digital ID system says you're a adult that has a full-time job at this place, you make X amount of dollars a year, and you can afford to pay the full adult ticketed price at whatever venue you're going to? Do they start cracking down on that? It would probably be a bit of a stretch in the next couple of years, but once the system and the infrastructure gets better, I could probably see that happening in certain governments. They could crack down on it. Do the corporations do the same thing? Do they start tracking your habits and spending and looking into what you're spending, where you're spending? Do they start bribing people? You got to come and shop more with us, otherwise we're going to let your place of employment know that you're a pervert that likes to go to the adult shop and buy porno DVDs or something. Who knows? It seems like a very slippery slope, and given how cunty most corporations and people can be, it wouldn't surprise me if extortion or limiting of personal and civil liberties was just around the corner. It's got all the hallmarks of a apocalyptic dystopian future about it, so I don't really trust it. I'm probably rambling now, so let's move on. So there's no guarantee the government won't do a similar thing with digital IDs. And given that every company pretty much tracks everything these days, it's not that far-fetched to believe that the government wouldn't do a similar thing or try to use digital ID to control us or something suspicious. The whole thing is a fucking con, in my opinion, but I could be wrong. So let's have a more detailed look at Australia's digital ID system. Back to digitalidsystems.gov.au under the Privacy and Security heading. Privacy and security benefits, private and protected, remains to be seen. Your personal information is valuable and worth protecting. Well, I'd fucking hope so. It's important to know who you are sharing your personal information with online, and that's the other grey zone is how do we know the government isn't outsourcing this to, I don't know, some type of online records firm. The government loves to outsource stuff for a cheaper price, so there's no guarantee they're not going to do a similar thing here. It's also important to understand how your information and privacy are being protected. Using a accredited digital ID provider means information is securely encrypted, only shared with providers and services with your consent, unless required by law or to investigate instances of fraud. What does fraud constitute under the ID system? Like I just mentioned, does that include you saving a couple of bucks on football tickets because you don't want to pay the full adult price, or maybe you're a low income earner, or you don't have a lot of money, but you're not on welfare, you're not disabled enough, or you don't have a card stating that you're below the poverty line or whatever. Maybe you're just trying to make it on your own and you don't want any help or want to be connected to any type of system. Is that classed as fraud? Probably not. It'd probably be a bit of a stretch, but it's fucking possible. And I'm one of those people that fits into the category that I didn't trust the government before COVID, and I certainly don't trust them afterwards. What's required by law? So now the police can use this digital ID system to look into you. Fair enough, if you've got nothing to hide, probably don't have too much to worry about, but where does it end? It's not like they're going after drug traffickers or murderers or pedophiles or drug dealers. Anyone could get caught up in it. Not collected, profiled, used or sold for other purposes such as direct marketing. Heard that before. Protected by strict security protocols set by the Australian government. And this is coming from a similar government that unleashed Robo Debt onto the population and never apologised for it. They just did it even though they knew it was fraudulent and wrong. So I'm not 100% convinced on that, nor do I trust the government to keep its word. Information about what services you access using your digital ID is protected and only used to manage your ID or possible fraud. The fraud one seems to be popping up quite a bit, which I find a bit concerning. What info is shared? Your personal information is only shared with your consent. Information that is shared is usually limited to your name, date of birth, contact details. Also, just most of the important details that make up your identity. Some services may require more information. Some, okay, what? They must justify this request in writing and seek express consent from you. They also need to demonstrate that they have appropriate security, privacy, and fraud control processes. They have completed a risk assessment before they receive more information. Is the government required to do the same thing? Don't buy it. All of this sounds good in a perfect world, but in reality, I don't think a system like this works as good as they say or they hope. Protecting your biometric information. So they want the biometric info as well. Interesting. Using biometric information such as a scan of your face, that is dystopian sci-fi territory if I've ever heard it. It's another red flag. Such as a scan of your face is a safe, secure and reliable way to verify that you are a true and live person and that your face matches the picture contained on a photo ID such as your driver's license or passport. When did the government become so untrusting of its own fucking people, and why are we having to prove innocence and our identities to a government that really already should know who we are? Why do I have to provide a biometric face scan to match the fucking photo on my ID? Why can't I just walk into a government office and go, photo, face, see you fucking later? This is making me even more suspicious now. It's the innocent till proven guilty kangaroo fucking court argument. You're asking to prove your identity when you don't really need to. I mean, who is asking us to prove our identity? Yeah, if it's a passport, okay, but even a passport doesn't require this much security. So this digital information, all this information collecting seems a little overkill for what it is actually supposed to be for. Why do they need so much just to do a background check, to get a job, to get a passport, or whatever the fuck this system is actually designed for? it hasn't really been explained well enough why it is coming in, what is the demand or the need for it, and why would you need a system like this when the old analog system works just as well? This is an important requirement to increase confidence that you are who you say you are and can allow you to use your digital ID to access more services. Okay, so if you sign up for this, then they're going to leverage you using more services and features. So you get privileged access if you play by their rules, jump through their hoops, and provide the face scan. So if you give them that extra information, they'll give you that extra little breadcrumb to keep you going through the maze, so you're giving up more information along the way. That's how I'm seeing it. If you want more access to services, like if you want your welfare payments, your medical payments, give us your facial scan, your retina scan, your foot size, and your hair color. Give us everything about you. It will be kept safe and secure, and you can have access to more services. I call bullshit. When you use an accredited digital ID provider to verify your identity using biometric information, a range of additional privacy and security safeguards apply. An accredited digital ID provider will only use your biometric information to verify your identity by matching an image of your face with photo ID. How do you know they're accredited? Because the government said so. The government has used plenty of outsourced contractors that have appeared to be good but have ultimately proven to be corrupt or even owned by criminal elements. So that doesn't really mean a hell of a lot. If they're going to outsource this to a other accredited company, how do you know that it's not some front company for the CCP or some other nefarious group working on the behalf of a nation state, or what does the government agencies like to say, a bad actor? Require you to consent before collecting and using your biometric information. Once again, sounds too good to be true. Delete your bio information after your identity is verified. Bullshit, they'll keep it and sell it. Ensure your digital ID, including all your personal information, is always encrypted with strong security protocols. A secure digital ID system. The Australia's digital ID system has been designed with your security in mind. Well, maybe don't bring it out. That's the best security. Why bring it out in the first place if there is so much mystery and focus on the security aspect? If security is the biggest issue, it needs to be proved as 100% safe, which is pretty much impossible. Nothing's safe on the internet, as I've reiterated a few times. And it's the government we're talking about. Governments can't do anything right. This includes the accreditation scheme and Australian government digital ID systems. This includes security features which undergo rigorous assessments and testing. Providers within the system may be accredited under the Digital ID Act 2024. Accredited providers must meet strict requirements for privacy protection, security, risk management, and fraud control. These requirements include protection of users' privacy and security and control against fraud. These requirements include the need for accredited providers to have demonstrated compliance with an Australian privacy principles and privacy code, and independent privacy impact assessment, independent information security assessments, ICT penetration tests, whatever that means. If you can hear some background noise, it's probably the wind. It's really windy where I am. Don't know if that comes through or not. Also makes you wonder, how many people who are going to commit fraud do you think are willingly going to sign up to a system like this? It seems like they're trying to tarnish everybody with the same brush. You've got to prove yourself innocent because everybody might be a fraudster who is going to use the system. If you've made a career out of committing fraud, or you are a nefarious character or a criminal, someone who is committing online digital fraud on a regular basis, you're not going to be using this system. So it seems like they're going after the wrong demographic of people. And if they really think people who are going to commit fraud are dumb enough to sign up for a system like this, I think they're a little fucking naive. Strong governance. Australia's digital ID system operates under the Digital ID Act 2024, commencing on the 1st of December 2024. So this is set to be implemented in a couple of weeks at time of recording, which is the 17th of November. The Digital ID Act is supported by legislative rules made by the Minister of Finance and data standards made by the Digital ID Standards Chair. From the 1st of December 2024, the ACCC will be the digital ID regulator, and the OAIC will be the privacy regulator of digital ID. Okay. Privacy Act. The use of digital ID involves the exchange of sensitive and personal information when a person is seeking to verify their ID online. Why do we need to verify our ID on fucking line? To use a system nobody asked for but the government. It seems like they are willingly trying to get as much information out of you as possible before they make this a legal requirement. And going back to what they were saying about the face scan, if you provide the biometric face scan, you get access to more services on the site. I would bet money that the government will probably try to make this legal in a few years' time. This is a test phase to see how many people are going to sign up. If they don't get enough people, they'll try to make it mandatory and get everybody to give as much information as possible. The only reason is why. Why do they want and require so much information? It's the same thing about the age verification on social media, that now everyone's going to have to provide documentation that you are as old as you say you are in order to use social media, which is a huge reason why I won't support the bills. They need to come up with a better way to verify people's age, verify younger people's age, which really shouldn't be that hard. Like if a phone's registered to a school kid, it should be pretty obvious if they're not 18 years old. So why not just restrict access to those accounts via the telecommunication companies that signed them up for the phone in the first place? I'll put more responsibility back onto the parents, because no one takes responsibility for anything anymore. That's half the reason society is like it is. Parents cry wolf that the social media companies are these soulless evil entities that have corrupted their children, but you gave your children the phones that gave them the access to the apps that corrupted them. So who's really to blame here? Zuckerberg or mum and dad? The Privacy Act promotes and protects the privacy of individuals and covers many digital ID transactions. The Privacy Act includes a range of enforcement and regulatory powers. Digital ID Act 2024 builds on the requirements in the Privacy Act, ensuring that an accredited providers must meet high standards of privacy and security. There have been 5 independent privacy impact assessments conducted on the Australian government digital ID system and associated policy, which are available to download. So if you want more information, you can go up to their website and you can look all this shit up for yourself and go into every detail of the proposed act. So what could go wrong with that? We all remember how good medical records online was, aka My Health Record. If you're in Australia, you probably will remember that. If you're not, My Health Record is a digital medical record where all your medical history was pretty much accessible online. I think it was brought in to cut down on the manual filing of records, which is usually the case. Yes, it does probably make it easier in some ways. You could opt into it, but even if you didn't, if you went to I had to change doctor a couple of years ago because mine retired, then he ended up working again somewhere else. He kept changing practices, so I just decided to go with somebody closer. I had to sign a form through the new GP to get my medical records sent from him, and that would have all been done digitally because he was storing stuff digitally. I didn't sign up online for it. This is something that just happened internally through the practice. And yes, it is convenient. If you go to a new doctor, they can just instantly transfer your records from one place to another rather than having to post them and then wait. But it wasn't a perfect system. And digitalhealth.gov.au is a very similar looking website to the previous one. So we'll have a quick overview of what it is. What's inside? Documents uploaded by your healthcare providers. Healthcare providers like doctors, pathologists, and pharmacists can upload clinical documents to your record, including allergies, medicines, adverse reactions, care and support plans, diagnostic imaging reports, discharge summaries, e-referrals, event summaries, goals of care document, immunizations, pathology reports, pharmacists' shared medicine lists, prescription and dispense records, shared health summaries, specialist letter. So basically your entire medical world on a easy to access, convenient digital platform, which also means it would be vulnerable to data breaches, which I'm pretty sure they've had. And then all your sensitive medical information is out there in the dark realms of cyberspace waiting to be sold. I mentioned before about private health insurance companies getting hacked earlier this year. I found an article on the abc.net.au entitled "Nearly Half of All Australians' Health Data Hacked." That's terrifying. Published Friday the 19th of July 2024 by John Daly. Nearly 13 million Australians have had their sensitive medical data stolen from an online prescription service, MediSecure, in one of the biggest cybersecurity breaches in the nation's history. Once again, another massive data breach by a supposedly safe and secure online record service. Hackers managed to steal data about people's identity as well as sensitive health information about medical issues, treatment, and associated prescriptions. Cybersecurity experts say the government needs to double down on security of public health records going online. Yeah, and they want us to believe that they've got our best interests at heart and all of our information is going to be 100% safe and secure on their new digital ID systems website. So the article is on ABC Listen, abc.net.au, nearly half of all Australians' health data hacked. It's from the ABC The World of Today podcast. It's a clip from the host and cyber and web security consultant Catherine Mainstead, Cyber CX Director of Cyber Intelligence. A brief article, but very concerning nonetheless. So what could possibly go wrong with digital ID? The government's claims that it's safe and secure are, in my opinion, bullshit. Whenever the government says something is safe and secure and that you should trust them, you can guarantee that they're lying. And just to further illustrate the point, just Google Australia's digital ID system and you'll get page after page of very alarmingly titled articles from various news agencies telling us about the flaws in the system. There's a lot of them. There's obviously way too many to read. I don't want to be here all day. This is one from the Australian Strategic Policy Institute. Australia's new digital ID system, finding the right way to implement it. Biometric update, Australia's digital ID landscape in danger of becoming soiled. Concerning. 9news.com.au, Australia has passed a new national digital identity laws. This is what it means for you. Australia moves towards economy-wide digital ID system as legislation passed. So we'll have a quick look at a couple of articles. This one's from 9news.com.au. Australia has passed new national digital ID laws. This is what it means for you by Daniel Jeffrey. May 21, 2024. What is national ID and how do they work? We already know how that works. A digital ID system will help avoid the painful process of collecting 100 points of ID. It's not really that painful. Having to scan them, get them printed, and get someone to physically sign the back of them to verify they're authentic. This requires a lot of physical paperwork and face-to-face interactions. Oh no, not face-to-face interactions. You wouldn't want to get off your ass and leave the fucking house in the morning. Lauren Perry, a responsible policy specialist at the UTS Human Technology Institute, told Nine, you can get them verified once and then you're good to go use them online for multiple interactions. In essence, the digital ID acts as a go-between between the user and the organization that wants to verify their identity. I use the analogy of it's like going to the pub and someone being your wingman. University of Sunshine Coast computer science lecturer Dr. Erica told Nine News. It's like setting that up through an app on your phone. So when you go to the organization, you type in their number that they give you, which is registered with the government scheme that you have on your phone. And then it contacts the organisation through the pathway that they have approved with the government and says, yes, we've got Erica's app. I can verify this is Erica. At the moment, the app that does that is the government's MyGov ID. But private providers could get involved after the legislation passes. They don't outline that too well, do they? Private providers, data brokers, nefarious organisations, dodgy companies, anybody could potentially get some of that information. The thing I like about this scheme is they are talking about also having third parties involved, Millie says. How is it fucking good? They just said everything is going to be safe and secure, but they want to outsource stuff or have third parties get involved. That doesn't sound like it's 100% secure. I'll read that quote again. The thing I like about this scheme is they are talking about also having third parties involved. Quite if you look at someone like MasterCard or Visa, they have a vested interest in making sure that they don't have fraud in their network. Why create a digital ID? What are the benefits? But who are the third parties and how do you know they're reputable? That's one of the big issues. Why create digital ID? What are the benefits? In short, security. Yeah, because the world's obsessed with security. It's such a dangerous and unsecure place. As opposed to when? 1,000 years ago, 100 years ago, 10 years ago. When you look at what conspiracy theorists say about never-ending wars and there's an agenda pushing the world towards it being more unstable. If you look back at the last 20 years and how many wars and conflicts we've had, combine that with climate change and all the other horrifying things happening in society, you can kind of see that the world's being pushed into believing that we need to have more security and more safety and more this and that, more control. And who gets that control? The government. And when they can't handle it, they outsource it to people like BlackRock or whatever other Merc organizations out there. I got a feeling this is probably going to go in a similar way. It doesn't seem like it's for our benefit. It seems like it's for the government to gain from or to control. And I am highly skeptical of it. The current system is plagued by identity theft, fraud, and a lack of control over personal data. Yes, but why is that an issue? They're not going after the companies that have been taking people's personal information and selling it and not storing it properly for the past 15 years. If you're an Optus customer, you gave Optus your information to get a phone and they kept it longer than they had on an unsecured server and lost it in a data hack. That doesn't fall on the responsibility of the customer. That falls on the responsibility of the corporation that didn't secure the data in the first place. They're responsible for it. So why doesn't the government enforce mandatory data and cybersecurity protocols and standards with these companies rather than always targeting the citizens and the people who have no control over where this information goes? These companies force you to go online like the banks do, take your information, and it's our fault when something goes wrong or they get hacked and they lose all the information. The current system is plagued by identity theft, fraud, and lack of control over personal data. Yes, who made the current system? It wasn't me, it wasn't you, it was these giant companies. So why hasn't the government regulated the lack of corporate oversight when it comes to security? It always gets taken out on the people. Dr. Philip Boss, a security expert and founder of privacy protection and software company Bluekey, told 9 News, by sharing personal documents and other information with a single provider, the digital ID would, if implemented properly, and that's a big thing, implemented properly, and you can't trust the government or anyone else to implement anything properly because nothing ever is. Negate the risk, so that doesn't get rid of the risk of something happening, it's only limiting it apparently. That's only if it's implemented properly. Negates the risk of identity theft from the likes of the data breaches and hacks that hit Optus, Medibank and Latitude in recent years. Australia is designing the system with a lot of security benefits, Perry says, so hopefully a benefit of this system is that we'll have less of those security breaches like Medicare and Optus because we are not sending those digital scans or ID documents via email to set up a bank account or of that kind of thing. Okay, that one kind of makes sense. So it'll actually stop that oversharing of personal information, yet to be seen. You won't be sharing the data in and off itself. You'll just be sharing a kind of tick of approval in addition to the practical personal benefits of not having to replace licenses, passports, other documents after a hack. Millet says the digital system can also provide benefits to small and medium-sized businesses that need to verify their customer's ID. For a cybersecurity perspective, it reduces what we call the attack surface, that being the risk of information getting out because the more organizations that have it, the more accessible it can be, she says. A lot of our small to medium enterprises, perhaps, they don't have the advanced cybersecurity practices. Often they cost a lot of money and they take up a lot of expertise, so we're trying to protect those organizations from attack as well. Are there concerns about the digital ID? Before passing the Senate digital ID legislation, was put before a committee which heard a number of concerns from experts about the new laws. Perry says most of these have since been addressed, although one remains. Okay, interesting. Quote, there were definitely concerns that we had, and we appeared before the committee hearings and provided submissions around things like voluntariness, inclusion, and accessibility redress mechanisms. And a lot of that has actually been taken on by the government and included as amendments, which is fantastic. I think the one thing that isn't quite up to scratch that we were hoping for is the law enforcement and police access to information. Under the laws, police will require a warrant to access any information stored as part of a digital ID, but Perry says the restrictions could be tighter. Yeah, okay. What's to stop the police from using that to look into everybody? There are some protections in there. Police can't just access whatever they want, she says. But it's a lower threshold than we would have liked to have seen. So we would advocate that any law enforcement or police access needs to be highly restricted and for investigation of serious crimes only. Okay, fair enough. And while the systems will mitigate the risks of data breaches from cyber attacks on all of the organisations that would otherwise have stored copies of IDs, there is still the possibility of an attack on MyGov ID. True. It's susceptible to what we would call an adversary in the middle or a man in the middle attack, Millie says. That means if someone can get between the app and the government servers, then that can cause problems, but this type of system is generally vulnerable to that kind of attack. Interesting and concerning. Maybe the infrastructure needs to be looked at before any of this shit actually comes into play. There's good readiness mechanisms that will be built into legislation, destructions of information, that kind of thing. So on the whole, we're pretty happy with what they have amended. It's actually a really decent piece of legislation. Interesting. This is the big one. This is the one I want to know. Will the National Digital ID be compulsory in Australia? No. While some of the concerns aired in the Senate committee hearings do go to the voluntariness of the system, the digital ID, as currently legislated, will be completely voluntary. That's until they change legislation or they put it into play and then make it mandatory in 10 years' time when not enough people use it. When will the National Digital ID be introduced? The legislation has now passed and the MyGov ID is already up and running, although only for around 130 government services. You can't use it to ID yourself with private companies yet. The laws are expected to come into effect in November, when the ACCC will be the digital ID regulator alongside the Office of Australian Information Consumerism, who will regulate privacy within the digital ID scheme. As for when private companies will gain access to the system, this is due to happen within 2 years of the new laws coming into effect, so November 2026. Not buying it. So I found another article that is the complete opposite to that goes into some of the negative and overlooked aspects of the new digital ID scheme. It's from theconversation.com. Australia's new digital ID scheme falls short of global privacy standards. Here's how it can be fixed. Published October 30th by Shishnananda, Jongkil Jeong, and Robin Doss. Australia's new digital ID system promises to transform the way we live. A lot of people say that whenever something new comes in, but really it doesn't make much of a difference to most people's day-to-day lives. All of our key documents, such as driver's license and Medicare cards, will be in a single digital wallet, making it easier for us to access a range of services. The federal government is still developing the system, with a pilot expected to run next year, known as Trust Exchange. It is part of the Trusted Digital Identity Framework, which is designed to securely verify people's IDs using digital tokens. Earlier this year, in a speech to the National Press Club in Canberra, Federal Minister of Government Services Bill Shorten called the new digital ID system, quote, world-leading. However, it has several privacy issues. Of course there is. Especially when compared to international standards like those of the European Union. There's a little section here in between the article saying you can trust this article because it's written by academics. It's from Deakin University. You can trust it because it's written by people who are apparently smarter than everybody else. What is Trust Exchange? Trust Exchange, or TEX, you got to love the abbreviation, is designed to simplify how we prove who we are online. It will work alongside the MyID's formerly My Government ID platform, where Australians can store and manage their digital ID documents. That's interesting. This is the first time I've heard of this Trust Exchange, or TEX. It's working alongside the formerly MyGov ID. Interesting. Why haven't the other articles mentioned it? The platform is intended to be both secure and convenient. Users would be able to access services ranging from banking and to applying for government services without juggling paperwork. Think of the system as a way to prove your identity and share personal information such as your age, visa status, or license number without handing over any physical documents or revealing too much personal information. But you already are handing over a lot of information and personal documents. I thought that was kind of the point. For example, instead of showing your full driver's license to enter a licensed premises, you can use a digital token that confirms, yes, this person is over 18. But what will happen to all that sensitive data behind the scenes? Falling short on global standards. The World Wide Web Consortium sets global standards around digital ID management. These standards ensure people only share the minimum required information and retain control over their digital identities without relying on centralized bodies. The European Union's digital ID system regulation builds on these standards. It creates a secure, privacy-centric digital ID framework across its member states. It is decentralized, giving users full control over their credentials. In its proposed form, however, Australia's digital ID system falls short of these global standards in several key ways. First, it is a centralized system. Everything will be monitored, managed and stored by a single government agency. This will make it more vulnerable to breaches and diminishes users' control over their digital IDs. Fucking knew there was something the government was hiding. And that does sound like an Orwellian nightmare. The government will have too much control over the information. It's centralized, it's more vulnerable to attack, and it sounds like that could go horribly wrong. What happens when the government wants to exercise more control? It's all in the one place. Second, the system does not align with the World Wide Web's consortium, verifiable credential standards. These standards are meant to give users full control of selectively disclose personal attributes such as proof of age, revealing only the minimum personal information needed to access a service. As a result, the system increases the likelihood of over-disclosure of personal info. Third, global standards emphasis preventing what's known as linkability. This means users' interactions with different services remain distinct, and their data isn't aggregated across multiple platforms. But the token-based system behind Australia's digital ID system creates the risk that different service providers could track users across services and potentially profile their behaviours. Ha! I fucking knew it. That was one of my biggest concerns about this system. I hadn't read that article before, so I didn't have any prior information to that, so I fucking called it. Profile their behaviours and track users across services. By comparison, the EU system has explicit safeguards to prevent this kind of tracking unless explicitly authorised by the user. Makes you wonder, why doesn't the Australian government get on board with the EU standards if this is what they want? And it also sounds like they probably modelled it after this and were aware of the EU system. So why don't they copy the same safeguards or have a similar set of safeguards in place? What are they hiding? Have they just overlooked this? Or have they tried to rush it through and not really thought out the finer details? Or is it something more nefarious where they don't want the safeguards so they can track people over various services? I kind of lean towards the later. Finally, Australia's framework lacks the stringent rules found in the EU, which require explicit consent for collecting and processing biometric data, including facial recognition and fingerprint data. Interesting. I knew there was something very fishy about that biometric shit. Filling the gaps. It is crucial the federal government addresses these issues to ensure its digital ID system is successful, which it won't be. This has got train wreck written all over it. Our award-winning research offers a pathway forward. The digital ID system should simplify the verification process by automating the selection of an optimal, varied set of credentials for each verification. This will reduce the risk of users profiling, but preventing a single credential from being overly associated with a particular service. It will also reduce the risk of a person being, quote, singled out if they are using an obscure credential, such as an overseas driver's license. If you can hear that, that is fighter jets flying over my house. There's a big car race on today. They always have the RAAF F-18s fly over about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I think it's to mark the end of the race or something. So if you do hear something that sounds like an F-18 flying over the house, that's because it is. And there it is again. Importantly, it will make the system easier to use. The system should also be decentralized, similar to the EU's giving user control over their digital identities. Yes, if it's someone's identity, that person should have a complete control over it and what's done with it and where it goes. It shouldn't be controlled by the government or any other third party. This reduces the risk of centralized data breaches. It also ensures users are not reliant on a single government agency to manage their credentials. Australia's digital ID system is a step in the right direction, offering greater convenience and security for everyday transactions. Convenience is always used as an excuse to bring in these new systems because we're too lazy to do them the old way. So why don't you do things a convenient way and just sign your life away to whatever system and put your identity in the hands of the government or whatever third party. However, the government must address the gaps in its current framework to ensure this system also balances Australians' privacy and security. And I think that hits the nail on the head. Privacy and security. There doesn't seem to be enough emphasis put on the individual's privacy or the security of where this information is. It seems like it's been heavily controlled by the government. You can probably also hear dogs going off because the Jets have set all the dogs in the neighbourhood off, which is great for my recording. I've got one more final article, also from theconversation.com, that highlights some of the missing details in the new system. It's titled, "The Government is Developing a New Digital ID System. It Must First Gain the Public's Trust," by Toby Murray, Associate Professor of Cybersecurity, Schools of Computing and Information Systems, the University of Melbourne. This guy sounds like he knows what he's talking about. On Tuesday, Australia's Minister of Government Services, Bill Shorten, announced the federal government is developing a new identity and credential system known as TEX. Yada, yada, yada. He said a new system will be a world-leading and represents an exciting step forward for Australia's digital infrastructure. But first they need to actually update the physical infrastructure to make sure the digital infrastructure is successful. But the details about the system are scarce. Shorten admitted it is still something of an abstract concept at this point. Yeah, but this is like a couple of weeks away from coming into effect, and this is written on the 13th of August 2024. So it's a few months ago, and these kinks aren't worked out yet. Doesn't give me a lot of faith that this new ID system is going to be successful. However, we know it will allow people to prove things about themselves, for example, who they are or whether they are over 18, to organisations while controlling how much information they share. The system could make it easier for people to access government business services. We know that. I'll just skip that. However, its success depends on a crucial factor, public trust. And right now, with the ghost of Robo Debt Royal Commission findings still very much alive, the public has every right to be distrustful of government technology. I knew I liked this article. Always be wary of the government, especially when they want to bring new systems to the table and want you to sign up for them. So, how should the government address the potential trust and privacy concerns surrounding its new digital ID system? Why do we need a new digital ID system? The trust exchange system is related to two other existing government systems, MyGov and MyGov ID. MyGov is a central online portal for accessing Australian government services. It includes the MyGov mobile phone app, which has a wallet feature allowing people to show digital versions of their Centrelink concession and Medicare cards. MyGov ID is the government's current online digital identity system. I actually didn't even know they even brought one in. I've never seen any information on it. MyGov ID is the government's current online digital ID system. It allows you to prove who you are to several online services, including MyGov, yada, yada, yada. The new trust exchange system is designed to give people much greater control over what personal data information they share with an organisations. At present, you can show your digital driver's license if you are requested to prove your identity when entering a sports club. You could also just pull out my actual wallet, pull out the real driver's license, and then hand it to the guy and go, "This is me." Kind of works the same way. That's the way it's worked for the last 100 years. Why change it, in my opinion? However, this requires you to share not only your age, but also your name, street address, and with club staff. The new system would allow you to prove that you're 18 by using your mobile phone without having to share any other information about yourself. If successful, the new system could reduce the need for companies to collect and store so much sensitive identity information about their customers. But it hasn't stopped them before. And that is the thing. They've been allowed to get away with it for a long time. They'll find a way around it. They'll find some loophole to collect information. If successful, the new system could reduce the need for companies to collect and store so much sensitive identity information about their customers. It therefore holds significant promise in an age in which sensitive data breaches like those that hit Optus and Medibank in 2022 seem to be an almost everyday occurrence. Public trust is vital. However, for the trust exchange system to succeed, the public will need to have trust in the security and privacy of the system. The Minister has said businesses will be able to trust the information in the system because it is not backed by existing systems like MyGov ID. This makes sense to create a standard strength MyGov ID. You need to upload your valid driver's license and passport into the MyGov ID system. Any businesses can therefore trust the information you share with it via text really is genuine. However, this raises the obvious concerns about how the new system itself will be secured. The question we all want to know. At the moment, the MyGov ID is used by relatively few organisations. However, the Trust Exchange system looks to have a much more ambitious goal: to become the de facto method for Australians to prove things about themselves to companies, venues, and government agencies. So, how they make that the de facto method is by getting all those government agencies, companies, and venues that require your ID to get on board with this, which will therefore make the public, and especially the people who use these services and facilities on a regular basis, that will give them more credence to upload all their information to the digital ID systems in order to, quote-unquote, make their life more convenient and hence use it. If that happens, accounts will be exposed to a far higher risk of hacking than MyGov ID currently is. Less obvious are potential privacy concerns. Will MyGov wallets contain a record of each time we prove our age to purchase alcohol? What about to enter adult establishments? Will the government have access to that information? And if so, what will that information be used for? And that kind of goes back to what I was saying about, what if you want to go to the adult shop and spend some money? Will the government know about it? Will they track it? Can they manipulate that? Can they extort that? The more I read about this, the more this looks like Big Brother really wanting control over every part of your life. They want to know where you work, what you spend your money on, where you spend your free time, what you're doing, what you're seeing. It sounds really fucking dodgy. I would not sign up for a system like this. Government can fuck right off. Finally, it is not clear whether the government sees the new digital identity system as a means to provide age verification to prevent children from accessing online pornography. From the government's perspective, doing so might seem attractive. However, that would raise significant privacy concerns if the system records online interactions, and that wouldn't just be age verification for children, that would be age verification for anyone that likes to hit up Pornhub or any of those other sites on a regular basis. Like I said, the government always has ulterior motives. They might say it's to protect the children so they don't see harmful content online, but when you dig a little bit deeper, especially into the age verification on social media and the internet, it affects everybody who uses it, and that means everyone's going to have to prove their age, not just those under the age of 18. What can the government do to build public trust? Probably not a lot. I think that ship has well and truly sailed. And in light of all the trust breaking the government has already done in the last 20 years, and as we've already looked at on this episode, Robo Debt, the pandemic, getting the trust of the Australian people back is not going to be an easy task. So how does the government do it? In the wake of Robodebt, it's up to the government to assure Australians the trust exchange system can be trusted and will keep their sensitive information secure. I fall into the category of never trusting the government ever again. Being someone who was targeted by the Robodebt system, I will never ever trust anybody in government on either side. They'll never get my trust back. And then I'm probably not the only one that thinks like that, so, good luck. This is doubly important given Shorten said the system will opt in rather than be mandatory. The government should act now to reassure the public it will protect their privacy and security. Not buying it, never will. This will require carefully explaining what information the system will and will not collect about individuals, who will have access to that information and how it will be secured. Crucially, the trust exchange system should be designed to limit how much information it records about the organisations individuals interact with. Ideally, it would record none at all. If this information is recorded, the government must carefully explain why that collection is necessary. In the absence of this kind of careful consideration and explanation, the public will have every right to remain sceptical of this technology. The end. And I think that was a really well written and very critical look at this new system. Everyone's talking about how good it is and how it's going to make your life easier and all this other shit. No one's really looked into some of the finer points of it. And that was by Toby Murray, Professor of Cybersecurity. It sounds like he's more than qualified to comment on it. So what do you think? It sounds like a disaster wrapped in a catastrophe, if you ask me. There's too many variables, too many details missing, not enough details in some areas, and a lot of grey zones. I don't think it'll be too popular. I definitely won't be signing up to it. And I think it's just another way the government wants to monitor, track, and control its citizens. But hey, that's just me. So what do you think?
G'day. Don't skip. Let me interrupt the podcast that you're currently listening to with some blatant self-promotion. What do you get when you mix two Aussie mates, a splash of booze, well, more than a splash, and some microphones? You get Cheers Big Ears, hosted by myself, the Chad, and my mate, Matt, and sometimes, but more often than not now, my missus, Bobby. It's a podcast of adult beverages and not-so-adult conversation. It's not serious, far from it. Well, except for that one episode, but that was just that one. We're available wherever you get your podcast fix. Cheers, Big Ears.
And with that, that brings us to the end of the episode. If you'd like to support the Truth Tank, there's a couple of things you can do. Head on over to the Facebook and Instagram page, give them a follow and a like, share them around. You can download your favourite episodes and listen to the Truth Tank on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Amazon, YouTube, Google Podcasts if it's still around, might still be on Podbean, or wherever else you get your podcasts from. Tell your friends, tell your family, tell anyone you think might like the show. Help spread it around. If you're enjoying the Truth Tank, why don't you go ahead and leave a rating and review on your preferred podcast player. Every review is appreciated and helps the show grow and get found. Live Communism is being recorded very soon. The first part's going to be out in March of 2025, so circle that in your calendars. If you'd like to do me a favour, help build the hype for it. Tell anyone you know who's into podcasts and likes history. It's going to be a huge show, so definitely stick around for that. Also got some big news. I am working on a Truth Tank merch store. Very soon you'll be able to show your support for the show with some wearable truth. You'll be able to purchase t-shirts, hoodies, tank tops, and hats and help support the Truth Tank. That should be up and running in the next month, probably late December, early New Year at this stage. So right, that brings us to the end of the show. Hope you all enjoyed it. A big thank you to everybody who listened to the end. Trying to pump out as many podcasts as I can before live communism. I've got a lot recorded and a few more to record before then. It's just a question of trying to edit them all and get through all that. It's a very long process. I'll hopefully have the Nostradamus series completed by then. But I'll be back in the next couple of weeks with a brand new episode. So until then, I'm a Tank. This is the truth. May the truth be with you.
Thank you.